Chairs No Waiting, episode number 127, Mayberry Canceled. Two Chairs No Waiting is brought to you each week by weaversdepartmentstore.com. Drop by over at Weavers, pick up some of your favorite Mayberry things. Got all kinds of wonderful things over there. DVDs, books, t-shirts. If you like the Andy Griffith Show, drop by weaversdepartmentstore.com. Two Chairs No Waiting is also brought to you by donations from listeners like you. Tonight's executive producer of Two Chairs No Waiting, episode number 127, is Jay Hicks. Jay, thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it. Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Allan Newsome. I'm the host of Two Chairs No Waiting. I guess you already figured that out. I forgot to tell that last week on the podcast. I made a no-no, didn't tell everybody who I was. And every episode, somebody's first episode. Hopefully you've been listening for a while. And if you haven't, drop back and listen to all the previous 126 episodes that we've done. But tonight's Mayberry Canceled. You know, canceled. I figure that'll get people to actually start listening. But back in March 1971, CBS went on a canceling spree and shut down production on all their rural comedies. The end of 1971 saw cancellations of shows like Green Acres, the Beverly Hillbillies, Hee-Haw, Lassie, the Jim Nabors Hour. It was a variety show that Jim Nabors, Gomer, was doing. Hogans Heroes, and of course, Mayberry RFD, the spinoff from the Andy Griffith Show starring Ken Berry. Petticoat Junction had been canceled the previous year. Just, it wasn't that same year, but it was all CBS and the other networks really trying to get rid of rural programming. So it's not a complete list I gave you, but it gives you an idea about it. And this is how Pat Buttram, Mr. Haney, Mr. Douglas, how he put it. He said, CBS canceled everything with a tree, even Lassie. At the time of the purge, Mayberry RFD was number 15 in the ratings. So it wasn't canceled because it wasn't getting good ratings. It was just canceled because it was a rural show. Well, on Saturday, March 5th of this year, 2011, this year as I'm recording this, they had a panel discussion that was held as part of the George Lindsey UNA Film Festival that's held yearly. This was the 14th year of that film festival. And the panel was on Southern rural humor in television and film. The participants were Birmingham author Tim Hollis, actor Danny Vinson, media studies scholar Dr. Jacob Podber, as well as the host of this show, me, Allan Newsome. I was there. I was invited to be a part of the panel. And so the topic, what they were talking about, was Southern rural humor on television and film. And the main focus was really the fact that rural America was often portrayed in a somewhat negative light, in the sense that they were, not intelligent. They were ignorant of things. They were not the sharpest knife in the drawer, So, but I couldn't hear, and I want to apologize to the other two panelists, but Danny Vinson and Dr. Podber, I couldn't hear them. They were sitting all the way on the other end of the table, so they weren't close to my recorder. But I was able to record what Tim Hollis said. So let's hear that, because this is from Tim over at the George Lindsey UNA Film Festival. So here he is.
Certainly, Tim, in chronicling the history of some of the early local television personalities, let me maybe start with you and talk a little bit about some of your research and the people that you've identified. And then let's have Danny and Allan talk again about their challenges as actors playing a role.
Well, when I started working on this Ain't That a Knee Slapper book about rural comedy, I told the publisher that one of the things that I wanted to get across is that, of course, now most people think that rural comedy and Southern are the same thing, but they really are not. Rural comedy began in the early days of radio, and the first rural radio comedians were not supposed to be Southern characters. They were supposed to be New England rural characters. There was a program in the late 20s and early 30s called the Stebbins Boys that was about two old men running a general store up in on the main seacoast. And of course that program was a big success. Now, pretty soon after that program started on radio, we got Lum and Abner, who were from Arkansas, and they liked the idea of having a general store, but they didn't want to do it as long as the Stebbins boys had that. But as soon as the Stebbins boys went off the air, Lum and Abner opened a general store, and that was the basis of their show from that point on. It's interesting that of all of the rural comedians that were on radio, Lum and Abner was one series that they never could manage to make the transition to television. They tried several different times, but even the early in the year that the Andy Griffith Show premiered, 4-Star Television had done a Lum and Abner TV pilot that they couldn't sell. And, you know, you kind of wonder if they had done that pilot a year later, it might have sold, because all of a sudden CBS exploded into the rural comedy. One thing that you mentioned that reminded me of something that I wanted to bring up is that, as a rule, when these highly successful rural TV programs first premiered, almost unanimously the critics absolutely hated them. I mean, they would rush for the thesaurus to find new words to use to describe how terrible these programs were. And the more the critics yelled about them, the more popular the shows became. It happened with the Beverly Hillbillies. The critics said they had never seen anything that terrible on TV. And then in the late 60s, when Hee-Haw came along, they just thought that was the bottom of the barrel. And one thing that really upset them is because CBS put on Hee-Haw to replace the canceled Smothers Brothers program. And of course the Smothers Brothers were the darlings of the intellectuals. So when they yanked them off and put on Hee-Haw instead, I mean, it just absolutely sent them into fits. And then 10 years later, in the late 70s, when the Dukes of Hazzard came on, the critics said they had never seen anything that bad on TV before. So it's sort of funny that every time one of these programs that was a huge hit in the ratings came along, the critics hated it, which I think in this book I said I think maybe one reason they hated the Beverly Hillbillies so much is that it was really the first time that you were supposed to be sympathetic with the hillbilly characters, whereas before you had Little Abner and Snuffy Smith, you were supposed to laugh at how stupid they were. But all of a sudden, with the Beverly Hillbillies, the hillbillies were the good guys in the program, and the people that they outsmarted were the same kind of people that the critics were. So that may be one thing that did it. But one thing that I don't think I've ever heard is what the critics thought of Andy Griffith's program when it started. Did they hate it as badly as the other rural programs?
Yeah, I've never heard.
I never heard one way or another, really.
Yeah.
Alan, didn't Andy Griffith get legitimacy because he was sort of a spin-off of Danny Thomas?
That probably did help. And Andy Griffith's show was not. It was kind of a little different than the Beverly Hillbillies or something.
Yeah, sure.
It was a more. Even though it was rural to some extent, I would say it was in a town.
Yeah. Well, it was closer to Lum and Abner than the Beverly Hillbillies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I can say, going to what you were saying, I'm Allan Newsome, by the way, because you probably don't know who I am. I run the website for the Andy Griffith Show Rerun Watchers Club at imayberry.com. So you guys, if you like the Andy Griffith Show, it's a good place to go. If you don't, you're not going to enjoy it. But what I was going to say was, they had those rural comedies that you were talking about on CBS. They had the Andy Griffith Show, Green Acres, Petticoat Junction. They had all those shows, and then eventually RFD that took over from the
Gomer Pyle.
Gomer Pyle. And then they all got canceled at the same time. And that was basically a reaction, again, to this hillbilly rule. They didn't like being the hillbilly network.
Yeah, what happened, of course, CBS they were getting tired of people calling them the country broadcasting system because so many of their programs had that theme to them. So it's interesting to see the transition between the two. In the fall of 1970, while all these other programs were still running, CBS very timidly introduced the Mary Tyler Moore Show to see whether this more urban comedy would go over, and it did. And then in January, they really bit the bullet and put All in the Family on. And it's kind of hard it's sort of hard to realize that the first season of All in the Family overlapped with the last season of Beverly Hillbillies. You just don't think of those two programs as being on the network at the same time, but they were. And
taking it up to modern day with the success of reality TV programs, CBS tried to produce a show called The Real Beverly Hillbillies, where they were actually going to take a bunch of hillbillies and put them in Beverly Hills and have it be a reality program. And fortunately, it didn't go over too well. But CBS is continuing its sort of.
I was going to say, I think it's so. Instead of doing that one, I think it wasn't CBS, but someone did one called The Real Gilligan's Island, which was just as bad.
Yeah, TBS did that one.
They did that one, much to their shame, I believe.
Much to their shame. Now, you notice that Tim was talking about the critics running to their thesaurus to come up with new terms that were against these rural comedies, and that they hated those things. So, Tim is a great guy, by the way, and he runs he has a museum of cartoon stuff. He's written all kinds of books. We're going to have links to where you can purchase his books, and the one that I purchased, which is right here in my hand, right here, is let me hold it where you can see it. If you're on the video, you can see it. There will be pictures of it at the Facebook.com/2chairs website. You'll see pictures of it, and there's links. Will be on the website where you can purchase it. It's called Ain't That a Knee Slapper? Rural Comedy in the 20th Century. It's got all kinds of things about the Andy Griffith Show, Beverly Hillbillies, all these old classic shows. Lum and Abner, of course. It's a really interesting book, and Tim has a lot of books. He's into nostalgia, and as part of that, he has a website, or he contributes to a website called Birmingham Rewound, and there was a article in the Birmingham Rewound this month. It's a March, and they went back into 1970s. So this is March 1971. And this article is interesting. It's CBS knife catches reviewer unaware. This is by a writer named Turner Jordan, and it's from March 18th, 1971. And here's what he has to say. He says, CBS has announced its new fall schedule with some of the most sweeping changes in the history of the network, sweeping off 13 shows at the end of the season. Greatest surprise of all the cancellations was the axing of the Jim Nabors show, which was the variety show we talked about. Others had been expected, but most of us had thought Nabors was set for about 5 years. He must have been way down in the ratings, is what the writer says. Dropping the Ed Sullivan after 23 years on CBS was expected. Others canceled were Andy Griffith, which was Headmaster, not a show. I understand why they canceled it. It wasn't Rural. It was after 1 year. Lassie, it was a shock to many kids. Hogans Heroes, Mayberry RFD, which had done well in the ratings. Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres, Hee-Haw, Men at Law, To Rome with Love, Family Affair, and The Interns. Hee-Haw and Mayberry were also surprises, but it seems CBS wants to get entirely away from the rural image. Of course, the FCC's ruling that only 3 hours of primetime programming can be offered had much to do with this big upheaval. CBS will thus use 6:30 to 9:30 p.m. on Sunday nights and from 7 to 10 p.m. on other evenings as primetime. CBS Reports will remain an alternate, I guess that was a TV news program at the time, will alternate once a month with CBS Friday Night Movie. 60 Minutes will become the weekly feature at 6 p.m. on Sundays in conjunction with the evening news. The Friday Night Movie will be 90-minute original dramas rather than old movies. Now, I just think this is neat to read a old article like this when they're talking about these series being canceled. New series will be Graves County, which have you ever heard of that? A contemporary western starring Glenn Ford. I don't remember that one. Cannon, I do remember. Cannon, a private detective drama with William Conrad. And then it goes on into some other things here. So it goes in and says, some of these new shows don't seem as appealing as some of those that were canceled. but one never knows, does one? Many local favorites are on the list to be dropped, mainly Jim Nabors. I think Jim won't suffer as much as the old Sylacauga boys is probably well off now with his years of Gomer Pyle and with Andy Griffith, and then on his other show. But it was quite a shock to me, said this reviewer, Turner Jordan. At least Alabama has Decatur's Dean Jones in the lineup. Anyway, Family Affairs have been canceled. Had been high in the ratings, as had Mayberry RFD and Hee-Haw. Seems CBS was determined to get away from anything referring to Hicks and country folks. And I don't jump on this the Birmingham News TV editor about these choices of CBS program directors. They had nothing to do with it. And he goes on, and you can look at the article. It'll be on the Facebook webpage as well. Anyway, so as you can see, back in 71, even then they were surprised when this happened. The Mayberry RFD, as I'd said earlier, I believe, was number 15 in the ratings at the time this was all this happened, and it was everything was canceled. So anyway, if you'd like to read some more of this, if you'd like to see this article, it'll be at facebook.com/2chairs. There'll also be a link on the podcast website at twochairsnowaiting.com for Birmingham Rewound. You'll be able to see it right there. And there's links to Tim's books. You'll be able to see all of his books listed. And I'm not even sure what all else I've got on there. There's all kinds of things there. The National Lum and Abner Society, we're going to have a link to that. And a Wikipedia article about the rural purge is what it's called this time. So this was a big deal that was going on at the time. So anyway, I hope you kind of enjoyed that. As part of that, there's a picture that if you're watching the video, you can see, or if you're not, you just go over to facebook.com/2chairs. You'll see it. In that same paper from March 1971, there was a ad that says, "Runaway hilarity when Don Knotts runs down City Hall." It says the movie the entire family will enjoy, How to Frame a Fig. It says, welcome teachers. So I guess teachers get to come. And it was held over for 7 more days only. Remember back in those days when there was like 1 or 2 movie theaters? Anyway, this is it's just fun to me to see some of these old newspaper articles like that. And so drop by over at Birmingham Rewound. Click on the link on our podcast show notes, and you'll be able to go directly to this page and scroll down. You'll see the How to Frame a Fig, and you'll also see this article about CBS knife catches reviewers unaware. So I hope you enjoyed that. We got a little bit of feedback from the last few weeks, so let me get to this one. We got Scott Fredrickson. He wrote in reference to episode number 126, Return to Myers Lake. He says, I'm a longtime listener and first-time writer. Love the podcast. I appreciate that. Thanks for that. He says he always listens to the show. My wife and 3 daughters, ages 18 and twins 12. I think his 3 daughters are 18 and twins are 12. His wife's not 18. But anyway, he goes, and he are longtime Andy Griffith Show fans and followers. The show is a big part of my life growing up in reruns. I'm 46. And our daughters' lives as well. We consistently quote lines from the show and everyday scenarios of life, i.e. the darling saying bread, taters, and of course Opie saying meat, etc. A few years ago, my wife and I decided to schedule a trip out west. They live in Louisville, Kentucky, he says. And I wanted to find any remaining sites that were used in the filming of the Andy Griffith Show. He was happy to find the actual site where the filming was made at Myers Lake, which is actually a public park, Franklin County Reservoir, as I talked about last week. And he went to Franklin Canyon Reservoir and had his pictures made there and enjoys himself. He says, as a lifelong fan of the show, I have to say, next to my wedding day and the birth of my 3 daughters, there's no other memory I cherish as much as the time I was able to skip rocks on the old fishing hole and walk the same path as the opening credits of the show That is, he loved that. That has helped my wife and I raise our 3 daughters on the old fishing hole, watching with the Andy Griffith Show. We've walked the streets of Mount Airy, Andy Griffith's hometown, but nothing compares to the memories of Myers Lake. I encourage everyone traveling to Los Angeles area to visit this sacred site. It's a memory I'll never forget. My beautiful wife filmed it on video, so he's got a great memory there. He says, keep up the work on the podcast. We appreciate all you do. I appreciate that. And he says, blessings, Scott from Louisville. Scott, thank you so much. And we've got pictures of Scott's trip to Myers Lake over at facebook.com/2chairs as well. So you drop by over there and you'll be able to see them. Next up, we got some feedback from Janet. She wrote in also about Myers Lake. If you'll remember, I was talking about, the water levels are down, and you could actually possibly go out there and pick up a rock, and that may be the rock that Opie threw. So here's what Janet had to say. She says, Allan, you mentioned about the rock and speculated it might be the rock that Opie threw into the lake. Well, I know how you can find out. Send it to the boys at the lab. They can analyze the rock chemically, determine its origin. That is, if somebody brought the rock in or if it's a local rock. And if the rock hasn't been handled too much, they may still be able to find Opie's fingerprints on it. Wouldn't that be great? Let us know what you find out. So, Janet, hey, thank you so much for writing. You're right. The boys down at the lab, could get into that. All right, and here we got one more feedback, and then we'll get out of here. This is from Richard from episode 122, talking about the mountain people. He says, speaking of mountain people, here are a couple of observations from a feud to feud. A feud is a feud. Watch closely as Andy unloads the Wakefield and Carter's shotguns so they won't accidentally shoot each other as they duel. When Andy hands the guns back, he switches the guns, and they each get the wrong gun back. You may never notice that. I had noticed that, but I had never seen this. He says, secondly, when Andy goes to the Wakefield's house to find out what started the feud, what was on the Wakefield Beagle's head? I'd never seen that. If you watch closely, it's in the frame where they show the dog for the last time. And the answer, there's a fly on his head. So I'd never noticed that. And I bet without the DVDs, you couldn't even have seen that. So, all right, folks. Well, we're running long again. I thought it would be a short episode, but it's not. So here we are at going into 23 minutes, and I want to thank you for taking some time to visit with me here in Mayberry. Really enjoy hearing from you. Thank you all for the feedback. I hope you enjoyed Tim's comments, and we'll hear some more from the George Lindsey Film Festival probably next week here on Two Chairs No Waiting. Love to hear from you. Call me at 888-684-8415 and leave some voicemail, and I won't talk as long. You can drop by Facebook.com/2chairs. Leave me a message there. Or you can also drop by twochairsnowaiting.com and not only pick up the podcast, but you can leave comments at any podcast episode there, and I'll see it as well. So, folks, I want to thank you all for coming, and we'll see you guys next time on Two Chairs No Waiting, your Mayberry podcast. See y'all later. Bye.